Okay, I'm going to record the final chapter 9 of the audio reading I've been doing of Tim Tate's book, Children for the Devil. And I actually did it all the other day, and then at the end it hadn't recorded. So I see the recording, and we're going to start now. Share screen. Let's hope we don't get a copyright strike on the last hurdle. So chapter 9, I'll turn that down a bit. It's a bit distracting, actually. It's a bit distracting listening to words. So we'll just go with some music. Beyond Disbelief. This is from the book Children for the Devil, Satanic Abuse and Ritual Crime by British author Tim Tate. Thanks to Craig McGowan for the manuscript. It would be a great mistake for speeches to be made on this subject, for it would serve to draw attention to the matter, and things could well become a great deal worse because of the kind of public excitement it would stir. So said the Bishop of Truro on the 26th of May, 1989. On the 1st of April 1989, Britain held its first conference for professional therapists and detectives to discuss the phenomenon of satanic ritual abuse. It was organised by the Association of Christian Psychiatrists and took place within the headquarters of the Royal Society of Medicine in London. It was also held in secret. The conference convener was a psychiatrist called Dr. Russell Blacker. He had wanted the event to take place so that the subject could be aired in public, a method he believed of creating a more widespread understanding of the problem. But he encountered opposition, not just to this open door policy, but to the very idea of holding the seminar at all. One psychiatrist, a consultant to an NSPCC child abuse team, wrote to Blacker, quote, "The presence of reporters can cause problems at ordinary psychiatric meetings. At this meeting, the contribution of what appears to be a large number of non-ACP members and the press sounds to me like a recipe for disaster, or at least a sensational and unhelpful exposure of the ACP to international publicity. My unsolicited advice would be to cancel the whole thing." The general thrust of that letter, and many others with it, was that the subject of satanic ritual abuse is too disturbing for the public to hear. This view is shared not just by psychiatrists, but by lawyers who refuse to trust juries with the evidence of rituals in child abuse cases, by detectives and social workers who fear a backlash and prejudice, from reporters who dread being branded as sensational gutter hacks, and even by the Church of England, the very organisation which would appear to have a vested interest in speaking out. This concluding chapter is about tackling those fears and facing up to the unpalatable lessons we need to learn if such abuse is to be stopped or prevented. It makes a series of recommendations, some new, some old, which, if taken together, could present a blueprint for an immediate government response. But first, we need to examine the fear that lies behind the response from the established church in England. Why, when the crusading, if unpredictable, evangelical alliance makes so much noise about ritual abuse, do the bishops stay silent? The answer is that they, perhaps above all others, believe that there is danger in recognizing the problem. Not a danger of adverse publicity or immediate backlash, but a spiritual danger to themselves and others. Canon Dominic Walker is the Church of England's main expert on Satanism and the most experienced counsellor of its victims. A dark and gentle man whose quiet demeanour and unassuming study in his Brighton rectory make a refreshing contrast to the feverish evangelism of the EA and Reach Out, Walker sees around 6 adult survivors a year. Remember, this is in 1991 this is written. The people, quote, "The people who come to me tend to be referred from other areas. I am the chairman of the Church of England study group on exorcism and the occult, so I generally get asked to see the hard cases. I've been seeing that number of adults for several years now. I sit and talk with them quietly and individually. I listen to what they have to say. Usually it does comprise the same sort of details: child abuse, murder, drugs, prostitution, and occasionally cannibalism. Quite often these people will tell me the names of those they say were involved. Sometimes they are the people who control the groups. Other times they are the names of famous or highly respected people. A number of survivors independently gave the name of a particular MP as being involved. I don't believe there was any collusion in their stories because they were separated by some long period of time. But when I have finished counselling a victim, I always tear up any notes I have made. I make a point of destroying anything which has recorded the satanic detail. I don't believe it's a good idea to have that material kept in the house. Have I ever passed on the information I've been given? No, I have not. I do not believe that would be proper. This attitude, sincere and generally expressed, is part of the problem. It's an old saw but true for all that for evil to triumph, it's only necessary for good men to do nothing. While satanic ritual abuse has a spiritual element, the solution is not primarily religious, although it is an undeniable fact that many of its victims turn first to the church. That they do so often because the secular agencies have ignored or rejected them is unfortunate. That the church then keeps their potentially vital evidence from the state's authorities is simply unforgivable. What then is to be done? Do we need new laws? Should there be a different type of policing in such cases? How can we protect the children in therapy while at the same time preserving their evidence? A little over a year ago, I argued publicly, this is Tim Tate, that so far behind was this country in understanding any form of child sexual abuse that we needed to hold a formal commission of inquiry into all its manifestations. That call was made in a previous book, but broadcast on most television networks and in dozens of newspapers. It has still to be heeded. Instead, the British government announced in March 1991 that it was to fund a 2-year study into ritual abuse by the respected academic authority Professor Jean Lafontaine. Welcome as this development has been, it is flawed from the start because it will allow the questions of therapy and law enforcement in ritual abuse cases to be considered without reference to the existing and major problems in handling quote-unquote ordinary sexual abuse cases. For Professor Lafontaine's research to have a chance of being successfully followed through, all aspects of the incidents, nature, and responses to every type of child sexual abuse need to be openly examined by a royal commission. For this reason, it must head this list of recommendations. 10 specific proposals. 1. The establishment of a Royal Commission of Inquiry into all aspects of paedophilia and child exploitation. Its hearings must be held in public unless there is a compelling personal safety reason, brackets for a witness, to work in camera. I have previously argued that one of the myriad specialist House of Commons committees would be up to this task. In the past 12 months, however, it has become clear that MPs have too many other demands on their time, too many potential conflicts of interest, quote, brackets, church attendance or vocal constituency groups, close brackets, to handle the ritual abuse inquiry. For this reason, it needs to be organised as a formal Royal Commission. 2. The Select Committee on Health, however, should institute its own hearings into the incidence of multi-personality disorder. Available evidence from the United States would suggest that Britain is locking a number of MPD sufferers in secure mental units when they could, given a greater understanding of the condition, be treated as outpatients. 3. The Royal Commission hearings would, I believe, undoubtedly highlight the desperate need for a unified and multidisciplinary national approach to child sexual exploitation, whatever its motive. Britain needs to add to its established network of specialist national police teams, one charged with policing child sex abuse. Such a unit should comprise officers from the Obscene Publications branch, existing child protection teams, HM Customs, the Post Office, trained therapists, and members of the Metropolitan Police Criminal Intelligence Division, the CII. It should leave its own secure database on the police national computer, or it should have its own secure database on the police national computer and work both nationally and throughout the world. 4. The expertise and intelligence developed by this unit would have a vital role to play in the next new agency, a National Child Protection Agency. This would fulfill 3 functions. It would analyse trends within the field of child exploitation, would maintain computerised records of all convicted child abusers and of missing or at-risk children, brackets, no such database exists in Britain at present, close brackets, it's 1991. I don't think there is still. And perhaps most importantly, would create a unified and reliable training programme for all therapists and investigators within statutory agencies. This training needs to take place urgently. The number of seminars teaching the realities of child sexual abuse and paedophilic behaviour is woefully inadequate. Under the auspices of the National Child Protection Agency, regular and compulsory workshops and conferences should be held throughout Britain. 6. In recognition of this, pressure must be brought to bear on the network of voluntary and unmonitored support groups, religious or not, to cease what is in many cases maverick behaviour. All child abuse counselling would be the responsibility of the statutory agencies. To conduct any such sessions should and would, under these proposals, require a specific licence. In this way, the dangers of contaminating victims' evidence could be minimised. 7. Additionally, all disclosure interviews should be conducted by a registered and specifically trained therapist and recorded on videotape. The practice of requiring a child victim to recount his or her testimony time after time to a variety of different agencies should be stopped dead by this proposal. That practice is genuine secondary abuse and is inexcusable. The training must include instruction on the techniques needed to avoid leading questions. These tapes should thereafter be admissible as evidence into court. The government should accept the findings of its own 1990 Piggott inquiry, which recommended precisely this. 8. To achieve this end, a new court structure would be required. There has been an unanswerable case for a unified court in England and Wales for nearly a decade. This proposal would require such a court to be established outside the restraints of the rest of the judicial system. Its method of operation should be inquisitorial rather than accusatorial, as at present. It would discard all the 18th century costumes so beloved of judges and lawyers in recognition of the simple fact that these frequently confuse and terrify young children. There is, of course, a precedent for setting up a new judicial system in Ulster's Diplock courts, brackets where the judge sits on his own without a jury in certain terrorist cases. The proposed family court would bear no resemblance to this highly dubious system. The example merely shows that the unthinkable can be achieved if the problem is perceived to be sufficiently serious. Wardship orders, if retained at all, should be used sparingly and with intelligence. It is pointless to obtain wardship to protect a child in a potential prosecution and then condemn him or her to disclosing to foster parents whose evidence may or may not adequately or subsequently be accepted. 9. A new law must be added to the statute book, one which formally recognises as a separate criminal activity the abuse of children in any rituals, satanic or not. There is a model statute for this in existence in Idaho, which avoids the indiscriminate approach of Jeffrey Dickens's amendment to the Criminal Justice Bill. The reason why such a statute is needed is that it would recognise ritual abuse as a more serious, long-lasting exploitation than, quote, ordinary molestation, and would force detectives and Crown prosecution lawyers to pursue the most substantive charge available. 10. The quid pro quo for this, and one long overdue, is the formal recognition in English law of all minority religions. This would extend the protection of the law to Muslims and Buddhists, as well as Wiccans and neo-pagans. That it would probably require the disestablishment of the Church of England can be viewed in the final analysis as a minor procedural problem rather than a fundamental constitutional obstacle. 10 proposals to change the way we protect children. None of them are cheap, but then none of them are prohibitively expensive. Politically, this programme cuts across all party divides. The major political groups in Britain each have policies and sensibilities diametrically opposed to its ingredients. Which is more important, politics or children's lives? Postscript. When Emma Eckstein consulted Sigmund Freud, she told him of her involvement in a type of ritualized sex abuse he had never heard of before. The child talked of, quote, a devil pricking her with pins, of being forced to consume blood, and of the draining of blood from other children's bodies with needles. She also told the therapist, while under hypnosis, that she had endured a ceremony in which part of her labia minora had been cut off and the perpetrators had sucked up the resulting blood. Quote, following which, Freud later wrote, the child was given the piece of skin to eat. Freud puzzled long and hard over the disclosure, not least because a medical examination confirmed the girl's claim about the mutilation of her vagina. In the end, he could find only one explanation. Quote, I dream therefore of a primeval devil religion whose rites are carried out secretly, and I understand the harsh therapy of the witches' judges. Freud presented this in 1896 in a paper he called The Etiology of Hysteria. When he read it to the Society for Psychiatry and Neurology in Vienna, he outlined his belief that a patient's mental illness, he called it hysteria, stemmed from a, quote, violent infantile sexual scene, and that these experiences were real. Patients, he said, including Emma Eckstein, were telling the truth. 7 years later, Freud retreated from this position. He began to claim that the patient's stories must be fantasy. He could not, by 1903, bear to think the unthinkable. 95 years later, we face the same challenge. Do we disbelieve automatically, or do we accept the possibility that what is before us could be real? The victims of satanic ritual abuse, children like Natalie, know the answer. Quote, maybe fear makes people disbelieve. I can only say what happened and hope you'll listen. Just be me for a while. You should have lived through what I did. Just be my cousin still going through it. If you won't listen, then there's nothing left. Appendix 1. A survey of ritual child abuse cases. Set out below in tabular form are the results of Pamela Hudson's survey of ritual child abuse symptoms and allegations, what have become known as, quote, key indicators, conducted in April 1988. The research sample was small, brackets, it took in one child from each of 11 reported and documented cases of ritual abuse by employing a simple yes-no questionnaire approach with space for comments. But it covers unrelated cases across the USA. The survey sampled the responses of adults responsible for the children at the point of disclosure. I'm indebted to Pamela Hudson for permission to reproduce the tables here. Those seeking further information and advice can contact Ms. Hudson at, this was in 1991, PO Box 807, Mendocino, California, 94560, United States of America. Copies of her book, Ritual Child Abuse, Discovery, Diagnosis and Treatment, R&D Publishers, January 1991, are available from the same address. I'm just going to go through this. I'm going to pick bits of this to share, and I'll go slowly on the final pages with footnotes and references. So, some of the tells: ritual abuse symptoms cluster in young victims. Compulsive erotic behavior acting out the sex acts, yes, across the board. A sudden extreme fear of the bathroom, bathing, washing, and rain, 3 yeses and a no. Nightmares, night terrors, night sweats, yes, across the board. Extremely high anxiety, fearful of being separated from parents, school, refusal, yes, yes, never apart, yes. Hyper-aggressive, temper tantrums, oppositional behavior, school disruptiveness, yes, across the board. Sudden eating disorder, refuses meat, ketchup, spaghetti, tomatoes, 3 yeses and a no. Fearful of going to bed, the dark, resists bedtime, will not sleep alone, yes, across the board. Vomiting for no apparent reason, abdominal pain, yes, across the board. Child was molested by other children in child group sex, 1 yes, a no, and not stated, another no. Child was molested by adult strangers, daycare workers, yes, across the board. Child reported the following types of physical or psychological abuse. Reports being locked inside a, quote, jail or cage, yes, across the board. Reports telling that abusers threatened to kill their parents, siblings, or pets if they told, yes, across the board. Bedwetting, poor appetite. Continuing, was buried or put inside caskets, coffins, or boxes. 2 no's, 2 yeses. Was held underwater, yes, across the board. Was threatened with guns or knives, yes, across the board. Child was injected, drugged, or poked with needles, yes, across the board. Children were photographed or filmed during abuse, yes, across the board. Children were tied by ropes, hung from hooks, placed in closets, spread over inverted pentagrams or inverted crosses. 2 yeses, 1 not stated, 1 no. Child describes abusers wearing robes, masks, having candles, yes, across the board. Children were forced to participate in mock marriages, 2 no's, 2 yeses. Children were defecated and urinated upon and forced to ingest both, 3 yeses and 1 intimated. Children observed animals tortured and killed, yes, across the board. Children described being given fake operations, 2 no's, 2 yeses. Children described the torture and sexual assault of others or of themselves, 3 yeses, 1 not stated. Evidential medical examination findings commensurate with sexual assault, yes, across the board. Children described small children and babies being killed, carved up, and eaten by participants, sometimes including themselves, yes, across the board. Afraid of water, wants to kill using both weapons. Plays bondage games. Fearful of doctors. Children report being taken away from the care provided, travelling by car, aeroplane, helicopter, boats, or submarines. Yes, across the board. Children describe being taken to churches, other daycare centres, graveyards for more terrorising, torture, and sexual assault. Yes, across the board. Appendix 2. Guidelines for investigating ritual abuse. Ritual crime presents a unique challenge to the law enforcement investigator. No other category of offending is as difficult to define or as complicated to understand. Sandy Gallant has researched ritual crime for more than a decade and has drawn from her casework a checklist of the most important ground rules when handling apparently ritually motivated incidents. These are appended below with her comments where appropriate. As with Pamela Hudson, I'm grateful to Officer Gallant for her time and assistance. Quote, ritual crime is something that is difficult to define because it's something which has developed in the minds of the perpetrators. It may come from their own sense of spirituality. It is also important for the investigator to keep in mind that there are many people who use rituals as part of their system of beliefs who are not involved in criminality at all. You may also find that there's another group which is involved in criminality and which incorporates rituals into their particular crimes. They may be acting alone, they may not necessarily be part of any organized group. A ritualistic crime may be committed against property or against persons. It can involve church desecration, the desecration of cemeteries or bodies therein, burglaries, very specifically those in which religious artifacts are taken, systematic cases of sexual abuse, in some instances suicides, and even homicides. Ritual abuse is best described as a systematic series of emotional, physical, and sexual encounters designed to instill fear in the victim and to enforce conformity. Rarely will you find that a ritual abuser is a paedophile, although some may be involved in pornography. All place a positive value on the harming of children, but the interest in such harm is not necessarily sexual. Indicators of ritual abuse for the investigator will include multiple suspects, multiple victims, the usage of certain types of ceremonies, robes, masks, goats' heads, the usage of blood, urine, and feces as part of the ceremony. We have begun to develop procedural guidelines to assist police officers in the proper investigation of their cases. Hopefully these will help them towards successful prosecutions in court. It is, however, important to remember that the most vital aspect in this whole area is that of protecting the child. 1. Document all information as you receive it. This is probably the most important thing to do throughout. 2. Clearly define the roles of investigators, social workers, doctors, and psychiatrists at an early stage of the investigation. 3. Tape all interviews so that you can maintain clarity as to precisely who originated what information. 4. Approach the prosecuting authority in the very early stages of the investigation so that you can ascertain the best approach to take. 5. Keep all information confidential for as long as possible. 6. Avoid tainting or contamination of evidence when you question children, e.g. by asking leading questions. This also needs to be pointed out to parents, custodians, and to any party involved in the case at a very early stage during investigation. Build your case on only that information for which you are able to produce documented types of evidence, or on information that you have been able to validate. If you are dealing with a potentially ritualistic killing, there are some specific aspects you should look for or be aware of. 1. The location of the body. Rituals are frequently held in very isolated locations like woods, open parkland, old army bunkers, perhaps tunnels or caves. 2. Missing body parts, both internal and external. Testicles, semen, and menstrual blood are regarded as having a high religious significance within some ritual groups. 3. Incisions or stab wounds, if they have been in certain patterns, this could be important. 4. Identification marks, certain tattoos or needle marks, very specifically in the armpits or in the bottom of the feet. 5. Was the body painted in any way? If so, what colour paint was used? Was there any pattern to the way the body was painted? 6. Certain types of powders or oils found on the body. These could be important because we found that certain powders or oils are used as mind-controlling substances. 7. Brand marks or scourging. 8. Feces or urine or blood found smeared on the body, or the absence of blood in the body. We would suggest that police officers should look for these specifics. In general, investigators should photograph the scene of the crime as soon as you get there. Document all of the indicators you find. Do not state any conclusions in the report as to what you believe these may mean. It is difficult, if not impossible, to believe that these types of crimes are occurring, but in fact they are. It is extremely important, therefore, that frontline police officers be able readily to identify the indicators of ritual crimes. You need to be methodical in your pursuit, accurate in your documentation, and you need to believe that these crimes are real. Although no longer actively working on ritual crimes, Officer Gallant is prepared to assist official investigators with background information. She occasionally assists investigations on a consultancy basis. She may be contacted at this address: Officer Sandy Bargioni, Gallant was her name before a recent marriage, Intelligence Division, San Francisco Police Department, Room 558, 850 Bryant, San Francisco, California, 94103, United States of America. Now I'm just going to go over the notes. I won't read from them. People can stop the video and just check them. It's just a good thing that this is all documented and referenced. I do believe there's a good concluding paragraph, so stay with me.
Yeah.
This is the bibliography and the index. And see how well researched and referenced this book is. I don't agree with all the personal opinion or exclusive recommendations, but he's done a damn good job. We've got to give him that. I'll just finish with this. Tim Tate is an investigative journalist and television producer specializing in children's issues. He has written and broadcast extensively on the problems of paedophilia and child abuse. His 1987 documentary film and subsequent book on child pornography were widely praised for their clear and unsensational presentation of deeply disturbing evidence. In 1989, he co-produced 2 television and radio documentaries detailing the incidents of ritual child abuse in Britain and America. Since 1982, he has researched, produced, and directed documentaries on Central Television's The Cook Report, the BBC investigative series Checkpoint, and a number of independent productions for Channel 4. He has broadcast on the BBC World Service and written for the Sunday Times, the New Statesman, the Listener, Women's Journal, and the Yorkshire Post. Both his previous books, Child Pornography, An Investigation, and What's Wrong with Your Rights, written with Roger Cook, are published by Methuen. Married with 5 children, Tim Tate lives in Yorkshire. Some reviews of child pornography. Tate's approach is rigorously unsensational. Only once or twice does controlled, deep anger seep through prose that is clear and level-headed and cumulatively merciless in its condemnation of a trade most people do not wish to know about. Tate's research is thorough, his arguments forceful. I shall press the book on teachers and fellow parents. These were some of the reviews. And this is a quote from a victim to finish. This lady threw a toothpick at Devil and his heart was bleeding. No, this lady threw a toothpick at David and his heart was bleeding. And they laughed out loud and they sweared. They said, I hate you. Daddy had a knife in his hand. He threw a knife at David and his heart began to bleed. And they took his clothes off and I closed my eyes. And they put him on a table. And then soon enough, his heart was bleeding. He was shouting out loud for his mother. And that concludes Children for the Devil. Angela Power Disney on YouTube and Facebook, angelascaches.org, no apostrophe. And Caches is spelled C-A-C-H-E-S.